The Varanthi Empire had ruled the stars for 12,000 years. And in all that time, they had never known defeat, their ships numbered in the millions, their soldiers in the trillions, and their conquered worlds spread across the galaxy like a disease that could not be stopped. 900 species had fallen before them, and 43 entire civilizations had been erased from existence. Their names forgotten, their histories burned. Their people turned to ash, and memory Emperor Kothvaran sat upon his throne of black crystal and watched the reports come in from the edge of known space. His scouts had found something interesting, a small blue world, orbiting an average yellow star, home to a species that had only recently learned to split the atom. They called themselves humans, and they had not yet discovered faster than light travel. They were primitive, weak, and utterly defenseless. The Emperor smiled, because he had seen this before, hundreds of times across thousands of years. Every new species reacted the same way when the Varanthi arrived. First came confusion, then terror, then surrender, and finally obedience. It was the natural order of things. As certain as the stars themselves, he gave the order without hesitation, sending the cleansing fleet to do what it had always done. The fleet consisted of 300 warships, each one capable of destroying a continent. And they crossed the void between stars in a matter of days. When they arrived in the system the humans called Sol, they did not announce themselves or attempt communication. Varanthi saw no need to speak with creatures they considered barely more than animals. Fleet commander Torvax stood on the bridge of his flagship and looked down at the blue world below. It was beautiful, he admitted to himself. Covered in oceans and green lands and swirling white clouds, he had seen many beautiful worlds before they burned. And this one would be no different. The attack began at exactly noon, Earth time, and it came without warning or mercy. Purple plasma fire rained down from the sky above 7 of humanity's greatest cities: New York, Beijing, Mumbai, Moscow, London, Tokyo, and Sao Paulo. The humans had no shields, no planetary defense systems, no weapons that could reach the ships in orbit. They could only watch and scream and die. In 18 minutes, 2 billion people ceased to exist. Buildings that had stood for centuries melted like candles in a furnace, and the streets ran with fire that could not be extinguished. Families who had been eating breakfast together vanished in flashes of light so bright that their shadows were burned into the walls behind them. Children who had been walking to school never arrived, and parents who had kissed their loved ones goodbye that morning would never see them again. Commander Torvax watched the destruction with cold satisfaction and waited for the inevitable surrender. Every species broke after the first demonstration of Varanthi power, without exception, and these humans would be no different. He prepared the standard message of subjugation, the same words his predecessors had spoken to 900 other races, but the message never came from the surface. Instead, something else arrived. A transmission cut through all Varanthi frequencies, overriding their communications with a technology that should not have existed on such a primitive world. On every screen in the Varanthi fleet, a human face appeared. She was a woman with dark skin and silver hair, her face streaked with ash and blood, standing in what remained of a command center behind her. Fires still burned, and emergency lights flashed red. Her name was Admiral Maya Chun, and she had lost her husband and 3 children in the first strike on Beijing. She had watched the feeds as her family's home vanished in purple fire, and she had felt something inside her change forever. The woman did not cry, did not beg, did not plead for mercy or ask for terms. Her voice was steady and cold as frozen steel when she spoke. You have attacked our world without provocation and murdered billions of our people, she said, her words carrying across the void between ships. You believe this makes you strong, but you are wrong. You have made a mistake that you will not live to regret. This is not a surrender. This is a declaration. We are coming for you. Every last one of you. And we will not stop until your empire is ash and your memory is forgotten. You fired first. But we will fire last. Remember this moment. Because it is the moment your empire began to die. The transmission ended, and for a long moment, silence filled the bridge of the Varanthi flagship. Then Commander Torvax began to laugh. A deep and genuine sound of amusement, his officers joined him. Their voices echoing through the corridors of the ship. The very idea was absurd. A species without starships threatening the greatest empire the galaxy had ever known. Torvax ordered his communications officer to send the recording to Emperor Kothvarin, certain that his lord would find it equally amusing. They were still laughing when they began the second bombardment, targeting military installations and government buildings. They laughed as they deployed ground troops to round up survivors for processing. They laughed as they established orbital control and began building their occupation infrastructure 6 months later. No one in the Varanthi Empire was laughing anymore. The humans had done something impossible. They had captured a crashed Varanthi scout ship and reverse-engineered its technology in weeks instead of decades. They had built their first FTL-capable vessel in a hidden facility beneath the ice of Antarctica, using materials salvaged from the ruins of their cities. They had launched their first counterattack against the Varanthi supply convoy and destroyed every ship before a single distress signal could be sent. Commander Torvax received the news of the attack while eating his evening meal, and he dropped his utensil in shock. The Emperor received the news on his throne, and for the first time in his long life, he did not know what to say across the galaxy. In the burned and broken remains of what had once been Earth's greatest cities, the survivors of humanity were building something new. They were building warships in underground factories and training soldiers in hidden camps. They were studying every piece of Varanthi technology they could find and improving it in ways the Empire had never imagined. They were united now. Every nation and every faction putting aside old grudges for a single shared purpose. Admiral Maya Chun stood before a crowd of generals and scientists and engineers, her voice carrying across the assembly. They thought they were conquering us, she said, and her words were hard as diamond. They were wrong. They were teaching us, and we are very fast learners. The war had only just begun, and humanity intended to finish it. The Varanthi had conquered 900 species across 12,000 years, and they believed they understood war better than anyone in the galaxy. They were wrong. Admiral Yuki Tanaka stood in the command center of Bunker 7, deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, and studied the holographic display before her. The blue dots represented human forces, scattered, outnumbered, and fighting with stolen technology. They barely understood the red dots represented the Varanthi occupation fleet, thousands of ships, millions of soldiers, and resources that seemed endless by every logical measure. Humanity should have surrendered months ago, but Yuki Tanaka had not become the Fae that deigned the youngest admiral in human history. By following logic alone, she had become admiral because she understood something the Varanthi did not. Humans were not logical creatures. They were emotional, stubborn, spiteful, and absolutely unwilling to accept defeat, even when defeat was certain. She turned to face the gathered commanders from every surviving nation on Earth. We cannot match their numbers, she said, her voice calm and steady. We cannot match their technology. Not yet. We cannot win a traditional war against an enemy this powerful. So we will not fight a traditional war. She pressed a button, and the holographic display changed to show a new strategy, one that would make the Varanthi regret ever hearing the name of humanity. I call this the doctrine of spite. Tanaka continued. For every city they burn, we will destroy one of their colonies. For every million of our people they kill, we will kill 10 million of theirs. We will make this war so costly, so painful, so utterly devastating that they will wish they had never found our world. There will be no negotiations, no treaties, no peace talks. There will only be war until one of us is destroyed completely." The commanders exchanged glances, and some of them looked uncertain. This was not how wars were supposed to be fought. There were rules, conventions, traditions that all civilized species followed, but the Varanthi had broken those rules. First, when they killed 2 billion humans without warning, and humanity was done playing by rules that only they respected. The doctrine of spite was approved unanimously, and the real war began. Human strike teams, using captured Varanthi vessels with modified engines, began hitting enemy supply lines across dozens of systems. They attacked fuel depots and ammunition stores and communication relays. They struck without warning and vanished before reinforcements could arrive. The Varanthi commanders did not understand what was happening at first. No conquered species had ever fought back like this with such ferocity, such coordination, such absolute disregard for their own survival. Human soldiers would charge fortified positions that should have been impossible to take, accepting massive casualties to achieve their objectives. Human pilots would ram their ships into enemy vessels rather than retreat. Human prisoners, when captured, would refuse to break under torture that had shattered the minds of hundreds of other species. The BOTS Ridijov Rizavritzisbri under torture that had shattered the minds of hundreds of other species. The Jiang Bevansin Vandea Undershur the Sud shatter. Varanthi began to study their enemy more carefully, and what they learned disturbed them deeply. Humans, it turned out, had been fighting wars against each other for their entire history as a species, while other races had achieved peace and unity before reaching the stars. Humans had spent thousands of years perfecting the art of killing each other. They had developed tactics for every terrain and situation imaginable. They had created weapons of horrifying creativity. From simple blades to nuclear bombs, they had learned to survive in conditions that would kill any other species. Extreme heat, extreme cold, toxic atmospheres, crushing pressures, and radiation that should have been lethal and most disturbing of all. They formed bonds with each other that defied logic. A human soldier would die for their comrades without hesitation, not because they were ordered to, but because they wanted to. They called it love or loyalty or duty. And the Varanthi had no equivalent concept in their language. Commander Torvax, still leading the occupation force on Earth, sent increasingly desperate reports back to the homeworld. "These creatures do not behave like any species we have encountered," he wrote. "They should have surrendered after the first bombardment, but instead they grew more determined. They should have collapsed when we destroyed their governments, but they simply created new ones. They should have broken when we captured their families, but they fought harder instead. I am beginning to believe we have made a serious error." Emperor Kothvarin read the reports and felt something he had not experienced in centuries. Uncertainty had assumed the conquest of Earth would take months at most, followed by centuries of peaceful subjugation. Instead, the war was now in its second year, and the humans showed no signs of weakening. Worse, reports were coming in from across the empire of similar attacks. Supply lines disrupted, outposts destroyed. Patrols ambushed. The humans were learning to use Varanthi technology faster than anyone had thought possible. They were not just copying it, they were improving it, finding weaknesses and exploiting them, creating modifications that Varanthi engineers had never imagined. Captured human scientist, when interrogated, had laughed at his captors. "You gave us a 12,000-year head start in technology," he had said, "and you expected us to be grateful? We are taking everything you know and making it better. That is what humans do. We adapt. We overcome, we survive. And when we are done learning from you, we will destroy you. The scientist had died under interrogation. But his words haunted the Varanthi officers who had heard them back on Earth. Admiral Tanaka received reports of a successful strike on a Varanthi shipyard, and a nearby System 30 enemy vessels had been destroyed. Along with the facility that built them, human casualties had been high, nearly 1,000 soldiers lost in the assault, but the strategic value was immeasurable. Tanaka allowed herself a small smile. The first in many months. Send a message to all commands, she ordered. The doctrine is working. They are beginning to fear us now. We make them fear us more. She turned to the holographic display and began planning the next phase of the war. The humans had been fighting for survival, but now they would begin fighting for victory somewhere deep in the asteroid belt, hidden from every sensor the Varanthi possessed. Construction had already begun on something that would change everything. They called it Project Prometheus, and when it was complete, the hunters would become the hunted. Admiral Tanaka looked at the classified files and felt hope for the first time since the purple fire had fallen from the sky. They fired first, she whispered to herself, alone in her office. But we will fire last. That is a promise, and humanity always kept its promises. 3 years had passed since the purple fire fell from the sky, and the Varanthi Empire believed victory was within reach. Human territories had been reduced to a handful of fortified systems, and Earth itself was under constant siege. Supply lines to the resistance were being cut one by one, and it was only a matter of time before the last human strongholds fell. Emperor Kothvaran addressed his court with satisfaction, declaring that the troublesome primitives would be crushed within the year. His admirals cheered, and his generals celebrated, certain that the long and costly war was finally ending. They did not know about the silent armada deep in the asteroid belt of the Sol system, hidden in a maze of rocks and dust that the Varanthi had deemed worthless. Humanity had been building for 3 years. In absolute secrecy, thousands of workers had labored to construct something that would change the course of history. General Marcus Stone stood on the bridge of the flagship and looked out at the fleet assembled before him, 200 warships, each one representing years of sacrifice and innovation and desperate hope. These were not copies of Varanthi vessels. They were something entirely new. Human engineers had taken everything they had learned from captured enemy technology and pushed it further than anyone thought possible. Ships were equipped with quantum shields that could absorb energy weapons that would have destroyed any Varanthi vessel. Their weapons could fold space itself, creating miniature black holes that swallowed enemy ships whole. Their engines operated on principles that Varanthi scientists would have declared impossible, allowing them to move faster and more quietly than anything in the galaxy. But the greatest achievement was not the technology, it was the secrecy. For 3 years, not a single word about Project Prometheus had reached enemy ears. Every worker had volunteered, knowing they could never leave the facility until the war was won or lost. Families had been separated, communications had been cut, and thousands of people had lived in darkness and silence for the chance to save their species. General Stone thought about those sacrifices as he prepared to address his crews. He was 63 years old, a veteran of wars that now seemed small and distant compared to this one. He had lost 2 sons in the early days of the invasion, both of them pilots who had charged impossible odds to buy time for civilian evacuations. He had watched the feeds of their deaths and had made a promise over their graves. That promise was about to be fulfilled. All ships. This is General Stone, he said, his voice carrying across the fleet through secure channels. For 3 years, we have hidden in the darkness and built in silence. For 3 years, we have watched our people die and our worlds burn. For 3 years, we have waited for this moment. The enemy believes they are hunting us, that we are desperate and broken and near defeat. They are wrong. We were never the prey, we were the bait. And now the trap closes. He paused, looking at the faces of his officers, seeing the determination in their eyes. Today we strike at the heart of the Varanti Empire. Today we show them what humanity is capable of. Today we begin the end of their reign. All ships, prepare for jump. The silent armada vanished from the asteroid belt in perfect synchronization, leaving nothing behind but empty space at the exact same moment across 47 Varanti systems. Human strike forces emerged from hiding and launched. Coordinated attacks, shipyards that had taken centuries to build were destroyed in minutes. Military installations that housed millions of soldiers were consumed by nuclear fire. Communication relays that connected the vast empire were shattered, cutting off worlds from each other and plunging the Varanti command structure into chaos. The attacks were so precise, so devastating, and so perfectly timed that the Varanti could not respond effectively by the time their admirals understood what was happening. Half their infrastructure was already gone. Commander Torvax, still on Earth, received fragmented reports of the attacks and felt his blood run cold. This was impossible. The humans were supposed to be beaten, desperate, on the verge of collapse. Where had they found the ships for such an assault? Where had they hidden them? How had they coordinated attacks across light years of space without detection? The answers came in the form of the silent armada itself, which emerged in the heart of the Corvin system, one of the most heavily defended positions in the entire Empire. General Stone smiled as his sensors showed the Varanti fleet scrambling to respond. They were in disarray, their formations broken, their communications disrupted by the attacks on their relay network. All ships, weapons free, he ordered. Show them what we have learned. The battle that followed would be remembered for 1,000 years. Human vessels moved through the Varanti formation like wolves among sheep, their new weapons tearing through shields and armor with terrifying ease. The quantum cannons created holes in space that swallowed frigates whole. The phase missiles bypassed shields entirely, detonating inside enemy ships. The jamming systems left Varanti captains blind and deaf, unable to coordinate or call for helping 4 hours. The largest military installation in the Corvin system was reduced to debris. 60 Varanti warships were destroyed, along with 3 orbital stations and a planetary defense grid. Human losses were minimal. 7 ships damaged, 2 destroyed when the battle was over. General Stone ordered a message broadcast on all frequencies. This is General Marcus Stone of the Human Defense Force. He said, "We are coming for you. Every world you have conquered, every species you have enslaved, every crime you have committed, we know them all, and we will hold you accountable for every single one. Your empire is dying, and we are the ones who will bury it. Remember this day, because it is the day everything changed." The message reached Emperor Kothvaran on his throne world, and for the first time in his long life, he felt true fear. The primitives had done the impossible. They had struck at the heart of his empire and lived worse. They had done it with technology that surpassed his own. The emperor looked at the reports of destruction across his territory and understood that the war had entered a new phase. The hunters had become the hunted, and the prey had grown teeth. He ordered every available ship to converge on human-held space, determined to crush this threat before it could grow stronger. But deep in his hearts, he suspected it was already too late. The humans were coming, and nothing in the galaxy could stop them. The 4th year of the war was the bloodiest in galactic history. Both sides fought with everything they had, knowing that only one could survive the Varanthi, their arrogance shattered and their empire crumbling. Through fleet after fleet at the advancing human forces, they fought not for conquest anymore, but for survival, and the humans met them with a fury that had been building since the day the purple fire fell. Captain Elena Vasquez stood on the bridge of the destroyer, relentless, watching the Corvin Nebula fill her view screen with swirling clouds of purple and gold. Somewhere in that beautiful chaos, a Voranthi command fleet was waiting. Intelligence said there were at least 40 ships, including the dreadnought Eternal Flame, which had led the second wave of attacks on Earth. Elena had personal reasons for wanting to find that ship. Her mother had died in Snow Paulo during the initial bombardment, burned alive along with 8 million others. Her father had survived long enough to join the resistance, only to be killed in a Voranthi raid 2 years later. Her younger brother had disappeared during the evacuation of Mars, and she still did not know if he was alive or dead. The war had taken everything from her, and she intended to take everything from the enemy in return. All stations report ready, Captain, her first officer announced. The fleet is in position and awaiting your orders. Elena nodded, her jaw tight and her eyes hard as stone. Signal all ships, she said. We go in fast and hit them hard. No mercy, no retreat, no hesitation. Today we finish what they started, the Battle of the Corvin. Nebula would later be called the Turning Point of the entire war. 47 human vessels engaged the Voranthi command fleet in a running battle that lasted 18 hours. The nebula itself became a weapon, its charged particles interfering with sensors and shields, turning the fight into a close-range brawl where human training and determination made the difference. Elena led her destroyer through the chaos, hunting the Eternal Flame with single-minded focus. She found it near the center of the nebula, surrounded by escorts and fighting off attacks from 3 human cruisers. The Relentless was not designed for ship-to-ship combat against a dreadnought, but Elena did not care. She ordered full speed ahead and opened fire with everything she had. The Voranthi commander, a veteran named Torvaxcal, who had served in 100 campaigns, watched the tiny destroyer charging toward him with disbelief. Surely, the human captain understood that her ship could not survive a direct engagement. Surely she would break off and retreat before his guns tore her apart. But Elena Vasquez did not retreat, and she did not break off when her weapons failed under the dreadnought's counterfire. She did not hesitate. All hands, brace for impact, she ordered. We are going in. The Relentless slammed into the Eternal Flame at full speed, tearing through its weakened shields and burying itself in the enemy vessel's hull. The impact killed hundreds on both ships, but Elena survived, protected by emergency systems that activated in the final seconds. She woke up in the wreckage of her bridge, surrounded by fire and debris, and found that her ship had crippled the dreadnought completely. Voranthi soldiers were already boarding, searching for survivors to capture or kill. Elena pulled herself free and grabbed a weapon from a fallen officer, determined to fight until her last breath. But the soldiers never reached. Human Marines from the cruiser Indomitable had boarded from the other side, cutting through the Voranthi defenders with brutal efficiency. They found Elena standing over the bodies of 3 enemy soldiers. She had killed herself, her uniform soaked in blood, some of it hers, most of it not. When they pulled her from the wreckage and asked why she had rammed the dreadnought instead of ejecting, she gave them an answer that would become famous throughout the fleet. They needed to understand something. She said, "We do not retreat. We do not surrender. We just keep coming until one of us is dead. And it is not going to be us." The destruction of the Eternal Flame broke the Voranthi command structure in the sector within weeks. Human forces had pushed through the nebula and into the core territories of the Empire. Other species saw what was happening and began to rise against their oppressors. The Kethrani, who had been conquered 8,000 years ago, seized control of their homeworld and declared independence. The Morvathi, who had served as slaves for generations, turned on their masters and opened the gates of a dozen fortress worlds. The Silvani, whose entire civilization had been reduced to a handful of survivors, joined the human fleet as guides and advisors. What had begun as a war of survival had become a war of liberation. And at the head of it all marched humanity. They fought through asteroid fields and across barren moons. They stormed space stations and planetary fortresses. They accepted casualties that would have broken any other species and kept advancing anyway. General Stone, now white-haired and scarred from a dozen campaigns, led the final push toward the Varanthi homeworld. He stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched the star charts update in real time, showing human forces advancing on all fronts. Status report. He requested. Enemy resistance is collapsing across all sectors. His aide replied, intelligence estimates the Varanthi have lost 70% of their military capacity. The path to Varanthus Prime is open? Stone nodded slowly, feeling the weight of the moment. 4 years of war, billions of lives lost, countless sacrifices made, and now the end was finally in sight. He thought of his sons, buried on a world light years away, and hoped they would be proud. Signal all commands, he ordered. We advance on the enemy homeworld. This is the final campaign. Let us finish what they started. The human fleet jumped to hyperspace, carrying with them the hopes and rage of an entire species. The siege of Varanthus Prime was about to begin, and the Varanthi Empire was about to learn the true cost of attacking humanity. The siege of Varanthus Prime lasted 40 days and 40 nights. The Varanthi homeworld was the most heavily defended planet in the galaxy, protected by orbital stations, defense platforms, minefields, and a fleet that had been gathered from every corner of the dying Empire. Emperor Kothvaran had called every ship home for a final stand. Determined to defend his throne or die trying, he stood in his palace and watched the human fleet arrive through the great windows that overlooked his capital city. There were thousands of ships now, not just human vessels, but craft from every species that had joined the rebellion. Kethrani destroyers flew alongside Morvathi cruisers, and Savai scouts guided them through the defense perimeter. The empire that had stood for 12,000 years was about to face judgment. Admiral Yuki Tanaka commanded the siege from the bridge of the Carrier Unity, coordinating the largest military operation in human history. She was older now. Her black hair turned silver by years of war and grief. She had lost count of the friends and comrades who had died under her command, and she carried their memories like weights on her soul, but she had not lost sight of why they were fighting. Status of planetary defenses. She requested. 70% neutralized. Her tactical officer reported. Enemy fleet is in full retreat toward the polar regions. Ground forces are ready for deployment. Tanaka nodded and studied the holographic display showing the enemy capital somewhere in that city. The Emperor was waiting. The being who had ordered the death of billions without hesitation or regret. She wanted to hate him, but she found that she could not hate. Required energy, and she had spent all of hers on the war itself. All that remained was a cold determination to finish what had been started. Begin ground operations, she ordered. Take the city intact if possible. We want them to remember what they lost. Human soldiers descended on Varanthus Prime in dropships and landing craft, supported by armored vehicles and close air support. The fighting in the streets was brutal and desperate, with Varanthi defenders contesting every block and building. But the humans had been fighting for 4 years, and they had learned lessons that could not be taught in any academy. They moved through the city with precision and coordination, clearing resistance methodically and accepting surrender when it was offered. Not all Varanthi soldiers chose to surrender, but many did. They had heard stories of human cruelty, of prisoners tortured and civilians massacred. But they found the reality was different. Captured soldiers were treated according to the rules of war, fed, sheltered, and protected from harm. Civilians who did not resist were left alone. Their homes and families untouched. This confused the Varanthi, who had never shown such mercy to their own conquests. One captured officer asked his human guard why they did not simply kill everyone as the Empire would have done. The guard, a young sergeant named Jackson, who had lost his entire family in the initial attack, thought about the question for a long moment. Because we are not you, he finally said, we fight because we have to, not because we want to. And when the fighting is done, we want to be able to live with ourselves. Your empire could never understand that. That is why you lost. On the 41st day, human soldiers breached the walls of the Imperial Palace. They fought through corridors of black crystal and chambers filled with treasures stolen from 100 worlds. They passed statues of conquered species, displayed as trophies and records of civilizations that had been erased from existence. And finally, they reached the throne room. Emperor Kothvaran sat upon his chair of black crystal, dressed in ceremonial robes, waiting for his conquerors. He was ancient by any measure. His scaled skin faded, and his eyes dim with age. He had ruled the galaxy for 300 years, and before him, his ancestors had ruled for 12,000 more. He had never imagined it would end like this. Admiral Tanaka entered the throne room with an escort of Marines, her uniform dusty and her face lined with exhaustion. She had not slept in 3 days, and she felt every one of her 67 years. But she stood straight and met the Emperor's gaze without flinching. You have won, Kothvaran said, his voice echoing in the vast chamber. I do not understand how, but you have won. Tell me, how did primitives who were burning fossil fuels when my ancestors mapped the stars accomplish what 900 species could not? Tanaka considered the question, remembering the day the sky had turned purple and the world had changed forever. She remembered the faces of the dead, the screaming of the survivors, and the rage that had driven humanity across the stars. You saw our world and thought we were weak because we fought amongst ourselves, she said. You did not understand that was how we practiced. Every war, every conflict, every struggle in our history taught us something. You gave us 12,000 years of your empire's knowledge in a single attack, and we are very fast learners. The Emperor bowed his head, accepting the truth of her words. What happens now? He asked. Will you kill me? Tanaka shook her head slowly. Death would be too easy, she said. You will live. Emperor, you will watch as the species you conquered walk free for the first time in generations. You will see your empire dismantled, your monuments torn down, your legacy erased, and you will know that it was all because of a single mistake attacking a world you considered beneath your notice. The Emperor was taken from his throne and placed in a small room with a window overlooking the city. He watched as representatives from every conquered species arrived on Voranthus, Prime Kethrani, and Morvathi, and Sylvani, and dozens of others whose names had been forgotten. They stood in the plaza before the palace and declared their freedom, their voices carrying across a galaxy that was finally waking from a long nightmare. Admiral Tanaka watched the ceremony from a balcony, standing beside the other commanders who had led humanity through the war. General Stone was there, and Captain Vasquez, and thousands of soldiers and sailors who had sacrificed everything for this moment. None of them cheered or celebrated. They had lost too much for joy, seen too much death for triumph, but they felt something deeper, a quiet pride in what they had accomplished, and a solemn hope for what came next. The war was over, and a new age was beginning. Humanity had not merely survived, they had freed a galaxy. They had proven something that every species would remember for millennia to come. When you strike at humans, you had better destroy them completely, because if you do not, they will rise from the ashes stronger than before. They will hunt you across the stars. They will tear down everything you have built, and they will not stop until the job is finished. The Empire had fired first. Humanity had finished the war.